I was born a shadow. Not the kind that follows you on sunny days, but the kind that lingers after someone has been erased from history. My father, once a respected advisor to Lord Edward Crawford, backed the wrong noble in a succession dispute. When the dust settled, my family was exiled to the cold northern territories, our names stripped of honor, our possessions confiscated. All except me. I was but an infant, too weak for the journey north. My grandmother, in her final act of wisdom, entrusted me to her dear friend, Lady Elizabeth Harrington. And so I grew up not knowing my true heritage, raised as a charity case in a household of privilege, forever in debt to the kindness of strangers. Adelaide, come help me with these linens, Lady Harrington called from her chambers. I set aside my sketchbook and hurried to her side. At 18 years of age, I had spent my life trying to repay the debt of my existence through unwavering obedience. Lady Harrington had arranged my betrothal to her grandson, Thomas, when I was still a child. A marriage that would secure my future, she said, though Thomas never bothered to hide his contempt for the arrangement. Yes, Lady Harrington, I replied, folding the delicate fabric with practiced hands. Such a good girl, she said, patting my cheek. Thomas should count himself fortunate to have such a devoted bride. If only Thomas felt the same. Just yesterday, he had loudly proclaimed at dinner that he'd rather wed a stable girl than a penniless orphan with no family connections. I had learned to weather such comments with a composed smile. That night, I dreamed. A vivid, peculiar dream that felt more like looking through a window than sleeping. I saw Thomas at a poetry reading, rescuing a young woman named Catherine Spencer when she fainted from the heat. I watched their eyes meet, sparks flying between them as they argued over the meaning of a sonnet. I saw myself and Lady Harrington standing in their way, portrayed as scheming villains in their love story. I woke with a racing heart and sweat on my brow. Just a dream, I told myself. Until it wasn't. Miss Spencer is quite overcome, gasped a woman's voice from across the room. I looked up from my corner seat at the Wilford Literary Society's poetry recital to see a young woman swooning, her fan dropping to the floor as she began to fall. Thomas, who had been looking bored moments before, sprang into action, catching her before she hit the ground. Some water, quickly, he commanded, his voice uncharacteristically concerned. The room buzzed with whispers as the young woman was revived, her dark lashes fluttering against pale cheeks. "Thank you, sir," she murmured, then frowned. "Though I believe your interpretation of Blake's symbolism is utterly misguided." Thomas's eyebrows shot up in surprise before he laughed, a genuine laugh I had rarely heard. "Perhaps we should debate the matter when you're feeling stronger, Miss Spencer. Catherine Spencer. Just as in my dream." The incident left Lady Harrington bedridden with distress. "He makes a spectacle of himself over some merchant's daughter while his betrothed sits ignored," she lamented that evening. "I'll speak with him," I offered, though I knew it would be a fruitless endeavor. Thomas had not returned home, choosing instead to attend a dinner where Miss Spencer would be present. When I found him at the local tavern afterward, he was deep in his cups. "Come to scold me, Adelaide?" he slurred. "To remind me of my duty?" "I came to suggest we might end our betrothal," I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "What game are you playing?" "No game. I simply think neither of us wishes for this marriage." "My grandmother would never allow it," he scoffed, though I could see the desperate hope in his eyes. "Perhaps she might if you would return home and speak with her properly." To my surprise, Thomas did return that night, though he avoided me entirely. The next morning, Lady Harrington summoned the household. I entered her chamber with trepidation, expecting her anger. Instead, I found her sitting upright in bed, looking oddly serene. "I have reached a decision," she announced. "The betrothal between Thomas and Adelaide shall be dissolved." Gasps echoed through the room. Thomas looked shocked but failed to hide his relief. "Furthermore," Lady Harrington continued, "it is time the truth was known. Adelaide is not merely an orphan of an obscure family. She is the daughter of Lord William Blackwood, once chief advisor to the Crown." The room fell silent. I felt my knees weaken. Her father's political missteps cost their family dearly, but Adelaide's bloodline remains impeccable. I kept her heritage secret to protect her, but now she deserves to reclaim her name and position. The revelation transformed the household's treatment of me overnight. Thomas's sisters, who had always regarded me with thinly veiled disdain, now sought my companionship. The servants addressed me as Lady Adelaide. Even Thomas himself offered an awkward apology. Most surprising was Catherine Spencer, who visited the following week. "I've come to beg your forgiveness," she said, twisting her handkerchief nervously. "I had no knowledge of your prior claim to Thomas's affections." "There was no claim of affection, only obligation," I assured her. "Thomas is free to pursue his heart." Catherine studied me with curious eyes. You're not at all what I expected. I've been designing jewelry pieces since I was a girl. My father says they're too unconventional for his shop, but perhaps, would you like to see them? She opened a small case to reveal exquisite brooches and pendants unlike any I had seen. These are extraordinary, I exclaimed. I've been considering opening my own shop, she confessed. But a woman in business. We could do it together, I suggested impulsively. I have some funds from my family's estate that Lady Harrington has kept in trust. Your designs and my investment. Catherine's face brightened with possibility, and an unexpected friendship was born. Autumn came, and with it, the traditional pilgrimage to Greystone Abbey to pray for blessings in the coming year. I went to seek clarity for my future, now unmoored from the path that had been laid before me. In the quiet sanctuary, I noticed a familiar figure, James Pembroke, heir to the neighboring estate. We had known each other as children, before my circumstances changed. He was consulting with the monk who cast fortune sticks for those seeking guidance. Lady Adelaide, he said, noticing me. You've come for blessings as well? Yes, I replied, though I'm not certain what to pray for anymore. Perhaps direction, he suggested. I've asked about marriage prospects myself. The monk beckoned me forward. Curious, he murmured as he cast the sticks. You and Lord Pembroke share the same birth pattern. Most unusual. He handed James a slip of paper. The highest blessing for a union. James's eyes met mine with unexpected intensity. A memory surfaced, him bringing me wildflowers when we were children, saying they matched my eyes. Our quiet moment was interrupted by Thomas's arrival. He spotted us together and scowled. Pembroke. I didn't expect to see you here. Harrington, James replied coolly. I come every year. Thomas glanced between us, something possessive in his gaze that I'd never seen before. Adelaide, my grandmother is asking for you. Later that week, I returned from a walk to find Thomas and James engaged in a heated argument in the garden. You've never shown her a moment's kindness, James was saying, his usually calm demeanor replaced with anger. Years of watching you dismiss her, While you what, Pembroke? Pined from afar? At least I was honest about my feelings. Honest? You've been cruel. And now that she's revealed to be a Blackwood, suddenly you care? The argument escalated until they came to blows, servants rushing to separate them. Their friendship, I learned, was shattered beyond repair. My newfound status attracted unexpected attention. Lord Richard, the third son of Duke Crawford, began calling at the Harrington estate with increasing frequency. A favorable match, Lady Harrington commented. Though the Crawfords were once aligned against your father. I found myself conflicted. Marriage to Lord Richard would restore my family's position completely, yet I felt nothing in his presence. My thoughts kept returning to James, his quiet intelligence, the way his eyes followed me at social gatherings, the books of poetry he'd leave where I would find them. We've received an offer from the Pembrokes, Lady Harrington announced one evening. James has formally requested your hand. My heart quickened. And what do you think of this? Her eyes softened. I think of how his mother was kind to you when others were not. How he defended you when Thomas would not. I think perhaps this match was written in the stars long before any of us recognized it. At 10 years old, I first met James Pembroke during one of the rare occasions when my guardian, Lady Harrington, hosted a summer gathering for families of similar standing. I was still adjusting to life as a ward of the Harrington household, painfully aware of my ambiguous position, neither servant nor family. That afternoon, while the adults conversed in the garden pavilion, the children were left to entertain themselves. Thomas, already showing signs of the arrogance that would define him, organized a game of hide and seek, but deliberately excluded me. You can't play, he declared. You don't belong here. I retreated to the library, my sanctuary since learning to read. There, among the leather-bound volumes, I found solace in Latin translations, an unusual pastime for a girl, but one Lady Harrington encouraged, believing education might compensate for my lack of dowry. I was struggling with Virgil when the library door creaked open. A boy with serious eyes and auburn hair peered in. Are you hiding too? He asked. No, I replied. I wasn't invited to play. He frowned, approaching my table. Thomas can be a proper fool. I'm James Pembroke. He glanced at my work. Is that Virgil? When I nodded, he pulled up a chair. I've been studying it too. Though I think you've mistranslated this passage here. I bristled. I have not. Look again, he insisted, pointing to a particular line. It's not the stars guide the lost, but the lost look to the stars for guidance. There's a difference. I examined the text more carefully and realized he was correct. Instead of gloating, he seemed delighted to have found someone who cared about such distinctions. You're very clever, he said with such genuine admiration that I blushed. What's your name? Adelaide, I replied, omitting my family name as I'd been instructed. Well, Adelaide with no surname. I think we should form our own society. The Society of Clever People Who Correct Latin Translations. I laughed to spite myself. That's a terrible name for a society. Then you'll have to help me think of a better one, he declared. And we'll need a secret meeting place and a signal and codes. By the time the adults called for tea, James and I had established the Stardust Society, complete with a secret handshake and a pledge to meet whenever possible to exchange books and ideas. Over the next 2 years, James visited the Harrington estate frequently, bringing books hidden in his saddlebag, gifts that had to be kept secret lest Thomas destroy them out of spite. On my 12th birthday, when no celebration was planned and no acknowledgement given by the Harringtons, James appeared at the kitchen door with a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. They match your eyes, he said, presenting them with a formal bow that made the kitchen maids giggle. And look, he pointed to a small white flower in the center. This one is called Lady's Star. It's for the Stardust Society. I kept that ribbon for years, hidden in a small wooden box beneath my bed along with other treasures, a smooth stone from the river where we once skipped rocks, a press lady's star, and the notes he would leave for me in hollow trees or tucked into specific books in the library. Dear fellow stargazer, one read, I have discovered a new constellation. I call it the Clever Girl. It can only be seen when one looks at the brightest point in the darkness. Your devoted astronomer, J.P. Everything changed the summer I turned 14. James arrived for his usual visit to find me confined to my room, supposedly ill with a fever. In truth, Lady Harrington had formally announced my betrothal to Thomas, and I had reacted with such despair that she deemed it necessary to sequester me until I regained my senses. James, ever resourceful, convinced the gardener's boy to deliver a note to my window, attached to a pebble. It read, What ailment keeps my fellow astronomer from our expedition? The stars grow dim without your observations. J.P. I replied with trembling hands, Dear Jay, no fever, but a future mapped without stars. I am to marry Thomas when we come of age. The society must disband. That night, as I wept into my pillow, a soft tapping at my window startled me. James had climbed the ancient oak tree that stretched its branches near the east wing of the house. You can't be here, I whispered, opening the window just enough to speak through the gap. If they find you, let me in before I fall and break my neck, he interrupted. This branch is not as sturdy as it appeared from below. Against my better judgment, I helped him through the window. In the moonlight, his face looked pale and determined. You cannot marry Thomas, he stated flatly. I have no choice. Lady Harrington has arranged everything. Run away with me, he suggested with the dramatic flair of youth. We could go to Scotland, or perhaps America. I almost smiled at his earnestness. And live on what? We're children, James. I won't be a child forever, he argued. My father says I'll inherit Pembroke Hall when I'm of age. We could wait. And what would your parents say to their heir marrying a penniless orphan? I challenged. Be realistic. His face fell, but then brightened with new resolve. Then I shall become so accomplished, so respected, that no one would dare question my choice of bride. I'll study law or politics. I'll make a name separate from my inheritance. James, no. I still remember the sudden dullness in his eyes until now. At 14, one can't be considered a child anymore. I think I fully understood my feelings for James at that time. But I loved Mrs. Halton, and I didn't want to make her sad. So I started to keep my distance on my own initiative. Our meetings became less frequent. James was sent to boarding school, then to university. I remained at the Harrington estate, learning the duties expected of Thomas's future wife while secretly continuing my drawing and painting, talents Lady Harrington indulged as suitable accomplishments for a gentlewoman. When I was 17, rumors circulated that James had become engaged to the daughter of a wealthy merchant in London. Thomas, ever cruel, made sure I heard every detail about James's intended bride. Quite beautiful, they say. And with £20,000 to her name. Clever Pembroke, securing his fortune and a pretty face. I told myself that I regarded James merely as a friend, just as I had done all these years. You're well informed, I smiled, looking nonchalant. Until I reached the sanctuary of my room, that night I suffered from insomnia for the first time in a long while, where I retrieved the small wooden box containing my treasures. The ribbon had faded, the lady's star crumbled at my touch, and the childish notes seemed to mock me with their impossible promises. I buried the box beneath the oak tree where James had once climbed to my window. A symbolic funeral for dreams that could never be. The betrothal was announced the following week. Thomas, upon hearing the news, stormed into the parlor where I was sketching. So you'll marry Pembroke? He demanded. After all these years in our household? I was never truly part of your household, Thomas. I was an obligation you resented. That's not. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Things are different now. Yes, I agreed. They are. You're free to pursue Miss Spencer with my blessing. Is that what you think this is about? Catherine? He laughed bitterly. Go ahead and marry your childhood sweetheart. I'm sure you'll be perfectly content. His erratic behavior confused me, but I had no time to dwell on it. Catherine had arrived to discuss our business venture. We were reviewing potential shop locations when raised voices from the library caught our attention. James and Thomas were arguing again. But now, my background has been revealed, and Mrs. Halton has also given up on matchmaking between me and Thomas. The stars, it seemed, had not finished guiding us after all. One day, when I was walking through the corridor, I heard Thomas's annoying voice. You've manipulated this situation from the beginning, Thomas accused. I've loved her since we were children, James replied, his voice steady despite his anger. While you treated her like an unwanted burden. You even had me convince you to attend those poetry readings where you met Catherine, remember? Everything I did was to free Adelaide from a loveless future with you. And now you have what you wanted, Thomas spat. What we both wanted, James corrected. You have Catherine, I have Adelaide. Why can't you be satisfied? I stepped back, my mind reeling. James had orchestrated events to bring Thomas and Catherine together? Had he been protecting me all these years while I remained oblivious? Catherine tugged at my sleeve. We should go, she whispered. But I couldn't move. James's next words held me in place. I've watched her create beauty from nothing. Seen her kindness to those who showed her none. Witnessed her strength when anyone else would have broken. I don't care if she's a Blackwood or a beggar, she's the only woman I've ever wanted. I pushed open the door. Both men turned, startled by my presence. Adelaide, James began, his face flushing. How long have you? Long enough, I said softly. Is it true? All this time. He crossed the room to me, taking my hands in his. Since we were 10 years old and you corrected my Latin translation. I've never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Thomas made a disgusted sound and stalked from the room, but I barely noticed. In that moment, the world narrowed to James's honest eyes and the warmth of his hands around mine. If Thomas can bring you happiness, I won't say anything, but then I saw how he treated you, and I couldn't bear it. I thought if he found someone else. You arranged for him to meet Catherine. He nodded. A happy coincidence that they actually suited each other. I laughed, tears welling in my eyes. All this scheming for me? I would move mountains for you, Adelaide Blackwood. Our wedding took place in the spring, beneath an archway of wildflowers that matched my eyes. Lady Harrington sat in a place of honor, looking satisfied with her role in bringing together two old family lines. James, mischievous, even in matrimony, sent Thomas and Catherine an elaborate invitation with a personal note that read, with deepest gratitude for finding each other. Thomas, to his credit, attended with good grace. The events of the past year had tempered his arrogance. He had begun studying law, showing aptitude that surprised everyone. Catherine's and my jewelry shop, Blackwood and Spencer Designs, became the talk of society. Her unconventional pieces, combined with my business acumen and artistic illustrations for our catalog, created a thriving enterprise that attracted patronage from across the country. As for me, I discovered that my talent for painting extended beyond simple sketches. Under James's encouragement, I began creating portraits and landscapes that soon had a waiting list of commissioners. My work, signed simply, A. Blackwood, Pembroke, became highly sought after, particularly among those who appreciated art that captured not just likeness, but essence. Your father would be proud, Lady Harrington told me one afternoon as she examined my latest portrait. He always said you had his eye for truth. Do you think I might visit him someday? I asked. My parents' exile had been commuted to house arrest in a remote estate, another detail Lady Harrington had revealed after my betrothal. James has already petitioned for permission, she said, patting my hand. Your husband is rather determined when it comes to your happiness. I looked across the garden where James was showing our young niece how to fly a kite, his laughter carrying on the breeze. From shadow to light, from hidden to revealed, from unwanted obligation to beloved wife, my journey had been unexpected in every way. That night, as James and I sat by the fire in our private chambers, I showed him a new painting, a portrait of a young girl standing in shadow while light spilled around her edges, suggesting a brighter future waiting to embrace her. It's how I felt all those years, I explained. Like I was waiting in shadow for a life I couldn't imagine. He traced the edge of the canvas with gentle fingers. And now, I leaned against him, content in the warmth of his embrace. Now I know that shadows are just proof that light exists somewhere nearby. I just needed to find it. Or perhaps, he murmured against my hair, you were the light all along, and the rest of us were living in shadow until you showed us how to see.